I'm on here from CNN. It's only released a month ago. WAPO columnist, men are lost. Let's see what mainstream's got to say.
The most read piece at the Washington Post website for several days this week was not about our record heat. It wasn't about the president's NATO trip or the election. It was an article by my next guest, Christine Emba, called Men Are Lost. Here's a map out of the wilderness. While admitting that, yes, men still dominate business and politics and many other spheres of American life, Emba documents what she calls a widespread identity crisis. Among her supporting statistics, men now receive only about 74 bachelor's degrees for every 100 awarded to women. With women becoming increasingly selective, more single young men now live with their parents than a romantic partner. Men account for almost 3 of every 4 deaths of despair, either from suicide, alcohol abuse, or overdose. The person who's owned this issue, both on this program and most other forms of media, is Professor Scott Galloway, as Emba puts it before quoting him in the Washington Post piece on his podcast and in his newsletter. The author, entrepreneur, and professor at New York University's Stern School of Business has made a specialty of talking about the crisis of unattached, rudderless young men and helping them aspire to more. Well, joining me now are Christine Emba, ideas columnist for the Washington Post. By the way, she wrote the recent book, Rethinking Sex, A Provocation, and Scott Galloway. His most recent book is Adrift, America in 100 Charts. Scott, when we first talked about this months ago here on CNN, you actually thanked me for my willingness to discuss such a, you said, controversial subject. So now I'm wondering whether Christine's coverage and the enormous reaction means that the nation is ready to have this dialogue.
This is a masterclass in how powerful journalism is. There's a lot of us out there, and a lot of mothers and a lot of young men themselves, and people such as yourself who have felt something and have been talking about it. And Richard Reeves really moved the ball forward with his landmark book of Boys and Men. But this one article, this sort of tour de force, has inspired more dialogue and emails and real serious conversation than anything that I've been exposed to over the last year. So Christine and her good work speaks for itself. And let me just say, over the last couple of years, the conversation has gone from one that immediately inspires a gag reflex, where people sort of see compassion as a zero-sum game and feel that if you're advocating for men, somehow that's misogynistic or not recognizing the immense obstacles that non-whites and women still face, to something much more positive. And also, we're beginning to crowd out the terrible, quite frankly, unproductive voices that filled this void that was created because people felt the problem and were talking about it, but no one was addressing it. And then some terrible voices entered this void. And Christine's work, and I think other work, is starting to crowd out some of those thinly veiled misogynistic voices and have a more productive conversation. A long way of saying I agree with you, Michael, and Christine's done us all a real service.
Christine, what drew you to the subject matter and speak?
Hey everyone, if you have a minute, please head over to legionofmen.store and grab yourself some cool merch as well. We have a bunch of limited edition designs, brand new stuff on the way, and all the proceeds go to supporting the channel. We don't want to be sponsored by corporations where we have to submit videos for review, have our speech impeded, or push any products that we don't use. So thank you so much to everybody that goes into the shop. Again, it's legionofmen.store. I'll put it up here for you guys. First time customers get a 10% off, and we have a bunch of great designs by artists from the community that watch the channel and support. They get proceeds as well, a percentage of everything that gets sold. So community funded through and through. And it's no synthetic fibers on any on our products. We're using cotton only, of course. I got your back from all those chemicals from synthetic fibers. Again, appreciate you guys. Let's continue. Funny when Tate becomes one of the most popular figures over on the internet, all of a sudden, we got a masculinity crisis popular. Start cashing in on this. Mainstream now gets involved pretending they give a shit. So cool, eh? Because when you have statistics that bear out these kind of horrific numbers, almost 3 of every 4 are deaths of despair for men today. I mean, really, just think about that. So self-deletion, alcohol abuse, or overdose. 3 of the 4 deaths. That's how this isn't headline news everywhere around America blows my mind. 3 of every 4 is self-caused. Speaks volumes to the problem we're having today in society.
The enormity of the reaction.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Scott, for your kind words. I'll speak to the enormity of the reaction first. I have been overwhelmed by how quickly the piece has taken off, and how many people it feels like people were sort of waiting for someone to finally say it so that they could begin to have the conversation that they had been worried about for months, for years. As Scott was saying, people are worried about their sons, their brothers, in some cases their husbands. I get a good amount of email, but I've never gotten this much email.
By the way, I have to mention this Richard Reeves dude. I have nothing against him, but God, it's such controlled opposition because he's this ex-femme, always apologizing about, I'm not just saying women, we should ignore them, but like men are a little help too. And then this guy saying that he moved the ball forward and brought it into the mainstream is such bullshit. Sorry, but does anybody remember that book, The Boy Crisis, with Dr. Warren Farrell? That's what brought the conversation into the mainstream. That book already warned of everything that's happening today.
From a single piece before. And, we run our comments section usually for 3 days. And the comments were shut down early because there were 10,500 comments on this one piece, which I cannot think of another article that's had that sort of response. So it really does feel like people are experiencing this in their lives. They're seeing their male friends and loved ones struggle, look for direction and not know where to find it. And I'll say that I started thinking about this piece. Actually, you mentioned my book, Rethinking Sex. That book was sort of an investigation of sexual and relationship culture after Me Too, trying to figure out whether sort of our changes in norms had worked for us, if they had delivered what they promised. And I talked to a lot of young women for that book, but I also spoke to young men too. And it was from them that I found the most curious and saddening response. So many of them just seemed totally confused. The sands had shifted beneath them, as Scott lays out frequently. The economy has shifted in a way that doesn't necessarily favor manual labor skills where men used to dominate. Women are succeeding more in college and elsewhere, which, to be clear, is a great thing. But young men didn't know what they were supposed to be doing or almost what they were for. Should I talk to women? Maybe I shouldn't talk to women anymore because that's seen as toxic somehow. So instead, they were just retreating. They were, staying in their rooms. They were, instead of trying to ask a real person out on a date, they were watching porn to feel like they were, getting their power back. They would begin to look up to these figures like, Andrew Tate, for instance, or Jordan Peterson. And they just
Scott,
didn't know what to do.
Scott, a part of this that you've addressed is the lack of sex, right? These guys are not having the type of relationships that young men of a different era would be having.
Look, we don't like to talk about it. We hear the word sex and our brain fires a bunch of different places. But think of, the whole shooting match, the whole reason we have an economy, the whole reason we're focused on creating a more prosperous, secure nation is such that we can all recognize what is the key to a rewarding life. And that is a series of deep, meaningful relationships. And core to that, or anchor to that, and I'm not saying you have to have this to be happy, is a productive, loving relationship with a partner. And you can look at the most unstable, violent societies in the world, and they all have one thing in common. They all have a disproportionate amount of young men who have no economic opportunity and also have no opportunity for relationships. And if we're going to have an honest conversation, we need to have an honest conversation. Sex and companionship are huge motivators and guardrails for young men. They put on a shirt, they blow dry their hair, they get their act together, they get a job. So the attributes, the peanut butter and chocolate of behaviors between masculinity and femininity make for a better world. And again, that's not to say that people along the middle of that continuum don't deserve the same respect and the same dignity. But most households prosper when there are risk-aggressive, rambunctious, more prone to action attributes of masculinity in concert with more thoughtful and more loving femininity.
And the conversation that we're not having is old heads, like the one in the center. I think I've heard him say before, just other anchors, when they say, well, men aren't having sex, and they'll just laugh like, why can't men just get their shit together? The old guys are looking down on these young guys in this generation as if they're better than them, not understanding that they help perpetuate and create this broken system that the men are growing into now, where the father was never present. They're living in feminized households with overbearing, devouring mothers. Society has coddled them, infantilized men. We've taken away things like shop class. We've taken away men's spaces. The narrative in society at large is that traditional masculinity is something to be hated instead of revered, that you're a predator as a man by default, right? This is all happening right now in the mainstream space. And so the old heads look down on the young ones like they're useless morons. How do you not know how to be a man? And the young ones are looking up to the old guys like, your time has passed. It's different in our world today. I don't have the tools you had to be the man you became. That's my issue. My disconnect, my identity crisis exists because I never had a father in the home. I don't have jobs available that you did. Economic incentives don't exist for me like they did for you. I can't afford housing. Inflation has destroyed my purchasing power. I can hardly afford to feed myself. I'm forced to live with my parents. You could get out of the house at 18 and on your waiter job, pay for college, pay for a place to live, and have a woman right after graduating with a job lined up. White picket fence American dream was a reality. In my world today, that doesn't exist. And now because of all the economic policies the previous generations have passed, kicking the can down the road, knowing there's a problem, not wanting to deal with it, we have an entire generation of men now that are perpetually getting more and more feminized, more and more worthless, valueless, looked on as the word for them now is incel, is used to describe any dude that's basically unable to get laid and get his life together. You're just a loser and you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's a crazy mentality to have, man. And we're witnessing it in real time as society is degrading. The moral fabric of society is not being held up. Men guard cultural norms and traditions. That's disappeared. Just look at the rampant drug use. Just look at rampant homelessness. Just look at crime rates everywhere. All the major cities. I mean, you can go on TikTok, you can go on YouTube, you can go wherever that are talking about the homelessness and the crime rates and all that. And you'll see all the old corner store shop, all the businesses on the first floors of all the major streets starting to shut down. Windows have metal bars on them. It's starting to look dystopian. People are just going in there and grabbing handfuls of things and just walking out with them in broad daylight. Nobody's doing anything. I mean, this is a symptom of a degenerating society. There are no more moral fibers holding us all together. And all of these spawn from the very same place, the nuclear family. No nuclear family equals chaos. We're seeing it happen. You need a mother and a father in the home to raise well-mannered children that are a net benefit on society. If you don't, you will be a net drain. Look at everything that's happening. And I don't care to hear all the, but what about, but my mom was a strong single mother and worked really hard. Congratulations. For every one of you that made it, 1,000 of your friends didn't. Just because we have one example, one exception to the rule doesn't mean we should celebrate something like single parent house, like single mothers are strong boss babes that should be empowered. No, we should shame people for destroying families. We should shame people for looking down on families, on parents, on everything, the backbone of what built our civilization. We're doing the opposite. We're celebrating degeneracy. We're celebrating hedonism. We're celebrating being loose with your body. We're celebrating rampant drug use, over-sexualization. We're celebrating all the wrong things. And yet we're surprised society is in the state that it's in today. Anybody with half a brain sees this happening. And anybody with half a brain will tell you that it's only going to get worse. This is going to get much worse. The ball is barely starting to get rolling. It's like where it was at the top of the hill. Think of like a roller coaster where it's just at the top right before the steep drop. This is where we're at right now. We're at the top. We're just about to get some velocity going on the downfall. It hasn't even begun yet. We're just seeing that move right there over the peak. It's starting to accelerate. This all started happening not too long ago. We're just crawling along. And then in the past, we're now starting to accelerate. And boy, we're going to go straight down. Watch, give it time. The people that have left the West, that have left all these countries where all these social issues are sprouting up, already see the future and what it holds. And they're smart and got out. There's a reason. You don't want to raise a family in such an environment, and you can't blame them.
And when men aren't engaging in relationships with women, and women can't find men they find, quite frankly, sexually attractive, we're in trouble. The greatest innovation in history wasn't the computer chip. It wasn't the iPhone. It was the middle class. And the thing that gave birth to the middle class was 7 million men returning from war who were given jobs and money and low interest loans, and quite frankly, demonstrated the heroics and the economic security to be very attractive to a lot of women. And we had the baby boom and the inspiration and the formation of the greatest entity of good in the history of mankind, the American middle class. Sex, companionship are key. And 1 in 3 men under the age of 30 in the United States has not had sex in the last year. And quite frankly, that as an adult is when they become bad citizens. It's no one's obligation to service them, but we need more economically and more emotionally viable men such that we can have more household formation.
Christine, you wrote a book on this a year ago. Is he right?
I mean, I do think there's something to that. I think that one of the pushbacks that I've heard to this piece and to this conception of, men being lost, men needing more care, is the idea that there isn't anything specific, excuse me, about men, that, we should all just be good people, that there isn't a particular sort of set of masculine attributes or something called manhood that men specifically should aspire to. And, so they say, well, why are we focusing on them? We should kind of focus on everyone. And I think it's a nice thing to think. And I do believe that everyone is equal. But we have to think about, what we see in real life, realistically. There are attributes to being embodied as a man that are different than those that you see being embodied as a female. And actually being a good person means paying attention to those attributes, cultivating them where they're necessary, and figuring out how to channel them into pro-social roles. And we can be clear and say that there are many models for how to be a good man. There's not one kind of good man, but to actually aspire to be a good man is a good thing.
She basically answered nothing. Young men already know what's waiting for them at the end of getting educated, climbing the corporate ladder, working the long hours, asking for a date, marriage, and children. It's being awarded with divorce, abandonment, parental alienation, and various forms of legal wealth extraction. Many older men around them are broken, lonely, and filled with regret. Can we blame them for checking out? What is completely missing from the conversation is misandry. It's a feedback loop, and feminine toxicity is causing a lot of gender strife. But we still aren't to the point where we can have an honest and frank conversation. There you go. Men are not lost. The entire society is lost. I mean, we've been shouting at the rooftops for this stuff, and then the plebs over there in mainstream are barely picking it up. And then you'll get comments like this that just shows you how far we have to go still, because this is one of the most amazing interviews I've watched in ages by some bald ass looking dude. Let me make this big. Just look at this guy, man. Completely lost. Wow, my adult son is going through this issue now. Every point they make hits home. Yeah, mothers are now realizing that their sons are failing to launch from the household. Where's the daddy? Anywho, hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.